I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. Oh, yeah, let me turn the music off. But welcome back, everybody, to I Mix What I Like. I'm Jared Ball. I'm joined by Sudip Bhattacharya today for, again, our ongoing, just publicly held meetings regarding our project, which I still tentatively in my head title the DonutKing something something. So please, everybody, come on in, like, share, subscribe, join however you would like, support, put this in your socials. And Sudeep, good morning, welcome, good to see you again.
Yeah, just want to make sure I have the AC in the back. Is that coming through on the audio?
Probably. I don't honestly, I'm not wearing headphones, so if it
Okay.
is, I'm not hearing it. I
Okay.
don't know if folks are hearing it in the chat, but I don't think it's,
Okay.
yeah.
Well,
So
yeah, I'm excited for this talk. It just feels I think we're entering the space, at least for now, where we're now like putting in the valuable critiques of what past things we've talked about. So I'm excited to be here again.
so we may get to something else. So I just wanted to just say quickly, as a reminder, as I'm remembering the history, this project started really from the chat of Saturdays with Renee, where she and I were going over something related to race and economics. You were in the chat at the time and then said something, and I said, well, we should work on this
Yeah.
project together. And then, so the point of the DonutKing project is to, from my, is to criticize the prevailing narratives around Black versus Asian communities and what are said to be the differences in accomplishments economically, and really challenging these notions that we often hear Black people should do what Asians do, and challenging the financial literacy side of this claim of Asians as the model minority, and then even challenging further, this notion of is this Asian category, because it is often. So we've been covering a number of books, documentaries, articles, and then you suggested we involve some Walter Rodney, and without even thinking about it, I just said, of course, why not?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I thought I would invite you to introduce the article you wanted us to review for today, and talk a little bit about the article and why you thought it was relevant for. And as you do that, I'll pull it up and at least show people what we're talking about. And folks can, of course, we invite them to read all of Rodney and this as well. But yeah, go ahead. What yeah.
Yeah, no. So I thought for a couple of reasons. One is because we had the DonutKing conversation, which was really fun. And we also had the Southern Fried Rice conversation just a
Oh,
couple of weeks ago, which was fun, but it was also just a bit, I don't know, not draining is putting it very, very light, not lightly, put it too seriously, because there's so many things going on. It's still a fun project, but it did feel like I was getting a bit confused and stupider. So I wanted to go back to some things also that because the thing is, I'm also working on my dissertation, my own project, and I do use Marxist and Marxist-Leninist concepts to describe what I'm doing, which is mostly interview based. And it does, and my project, if everyone doesn't know, like, it's just about the potential for people of color to be in coalitions together. So I've used Walter Rodney for that, and it's very, very useful, because even in this article it comes up at the end, his idea of solidarity, which is very, very interesting. And I think we'll get into it because it's so ironic how he's presenting it versus how it's presented today. But for me personally, like, what's the word, I wanted to do this because of the fact that Walter Rodney's is to me like a very great uh academic and an activist academic, and someone who's been on these sort of terms when it comes to figuring out the relationship between class and race, and not necessarily for like white and non-white, but within the non-white world, especially also between Africans and people who are part of the diaspora. So he doesn't take things for granted that way. Um, so for him, so for me, it was like, okay, let's just go into this space. And then also the article is a very short piece that he wrote leading into the what's the word into a conference that was coming up in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania in 1974, and this is supposed to be the sixth Pan-African uh, conference. And he wrote this article in anticipation of it, because the fifth one happened in Manchester, England, prior to Africa being decolonized. So it was a very different, it's kind of strange to think like 1974, 75. There were other conferences that happened between, but this is the first time where it was named as such, Pan-African Conference, so taking that legacy up. So it's a short article where he's basically going through all the different things that he wants to sort of discuss relevant to the conference and how it should be organized, and what are some of the conversations that need to be had about Pan-Africanism in that new context. So yeah, that's pretty much it. It's a very short piece, but it really covers a lot. So I wanted us to discuss it because I also do find his overall analysis, I just knew, because I didn't read this text, but I have read his other texts, like the Russian Revolution one, and of course the big one, which is this one. So I did read these texts, and I know that he brings in an analysis that I feel would be here at this point of his life, because this is also like several years before he would be unfortunately assassinated back in Guyana. So this is at the point of his life where he's very, very sure of his Marxist-Leninism or Marxist-adjacent politics. He grew up in a very Marxist home. Anyway, this is a very interesting point in his life,
So,
point in Pan-Africanism too.
do you want to take any time to talk about that introduction to that Russian Revolution book?
Oh yeah, why
Because
yeah. I would love to. Yeah,
I did go back and reread it,
yeah.
or read it for the first time. I don't think I ever read the introduction, to be honest with you, and read just as much of the book as I've gotten to, which isn't the entirety of it. But so this was my first read of the introduction, and that is co-authored by RobinDGKelley, and uh, it so it just led me to. I definitely want you to say what you would want to say about it. And by the way, I forgot to finish my thought earlier. Again, doing it again now. If we have time, we will come back and talk a little bit about the conversation that was had with Cherie and Geechee last night on Black
Mhm.
Liberation Media, um, uh, regarding with Dr. Joey. Um, because per the request, which I'm honored by, and we're talking about Dare to Win, Dare to Struggle, Dare to Win on Black Liberation Media from last night, building post-capitalist wealth versus financial literacy with Dr. Joey. Where Cherie at the end of the show specifically made the request that I review that discussion, and I have one ready. So, and I think it overlaps with our project. So perhaps if we get time, if we have time later today or another day, even we can come back and
Yeah,
look at that. But
definitely.
because I did ask you to watch some of it too. But
Yeah, and also
so
just in that sense, it has some. I was able to watch portions of it, so
yeah,
I'm excited to talk about it.
so yeah, but in this introduction, what that going back to the Russian Revolution book, Walter Rodney, and this introduction, co-authored by RobinDGKelley, and I'm now
Jesse
forgetting.
Benjamin.
Yes, thank you, Jesse Benjamin and RobinDGKelley. So for me, what it was just a reminder of is that I have not finished the Lusardo book. I went back and read a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more through the new Gabriel Rockhill book after reading this introduction, because what it was really reminding me is that I don't know enough about Stalin
Mm-hmm.
to assess the claims and the arguments that I often hear. So I admit I'm moved by my bias to be critical of those critical of Stalin because they seem to follow a very liberal
Yeah.
and anti-communist line.
Right.
But at the same time, I just admit I'm not qualified to assess the arguments in defense of or criticism of. And I've only read what Stalin I've read, from his own writing, like the dialectical materialism work and stuff like that. So I don't, criticizing him, I'm not qualified for. But I admit when I saw that Kelly and Benjamin politely, to be fair and respectfully, take a shot at saying at one point Rodney didn't have the benefit of the archives to look back on, for instance, and that he took a defense of Stalin, not entirely, not blindly, by the way, but he defends Stalin in a way that makes Kelly and Benjamin uncomfortable. I was like, well, again, I went back to that question that Rockhill is asking, that Lusardo is in a way asking, but are the critics of Stalin themselves communists, and do they desire a Marxist revolution themselves? So I'm like, I don't know. So anyway, but those are just so what did you?
Yeah. No, so I haven't read the Lusardo book completely, the one I think you're referencing. It's the Stalin book. But I did start reading it a while ago.
That's the one I'm talking about.
Yeah. I did sort of drift off, not because of Lusardo, just because of work reasons. But I did read. Yeah. There's only, I have like piles here and piles here. And then I did read the Western Marxists from Lusardo. So, and I've read his more classic text on liberalism. So I've read some of his work, and he's great. And I think I haven't read the Rockhill stuff, but he does touch a nerve with some people.
Oh, the Rockhill book is great. I mean,
and
I got I'm sorry to cut you off, but
go ahead.
The way, because I've skipped to the part where he's destroying the Frankfurt School.
Yeah.
And who, for me in grad school, were as far left as we were allowed to go, which and me adopting the Frankfurt School model and argument somewhat in grad school literally led to me losing my funding and getting into all kinds of trouble. So to now read how ultimately soft they are, I was even more right in my beefs with the grad school. Like even these soft ass anti-communists were too much for you. Well, anyway, my bad. Go ahead.
No, but I do want to add. So I read the Western Marxist book, and Lusardo goes in on them too. And he, along with George, I think it was George Lukács, who is the Hungarian Marxist. I read him as well because he's really cool. And he called them, what was it, Department of Sadness or something? I forgot what it was called. But he coined a term for them because their Marxism, allegedly, is very like, it has a level of some critique, obviously, like Herbert Marcuse has some critique, but it dovetails rather nicely with some version of U.S. power because it also presents history as very nihilistic, right? Like with Adorno and other figures, they're very much like the revolutions failed and there's nothing else to see. And this is like the 50s and the 60s. So Lukács, who is European, criticized that. And Domenico Lusardo, who is also European, definitely criticized that and said, how can you say that unless you are a very Europeanist thinker? So Lusardo was the one to have that point of view. So I always appreciate that. The thing about the intros, I do want to say, like RobinDGKelley and Jesse Benjamin, I do really like a lot of the stuff that they do, but I did pick up, so I respect them a lot, but I did pick up one thing, which was they definitely had they were sort of like writing this intro to kind of suggest that Walter Rodney did not know enough about the scenario, but they also sort of said some things that were quite interesting because like they were also saying like he has this sort of implicitly, I guess, pro-Stalinist view. And I was trying to reread the book because I have a bunch of notes in there, but I just didn't have time. But I just read a bit of the first essay with the two views of the Russian Revolution, where Rodney is trying to write from an African diaspora perspective how to view the Russian. He, even in that essay, wasn't necessarily defending Stalin. He was just saying the USSR was more of a collection of more people than Stalin. So that was kind of interesting, because even in the text, and I do want to get into this too, because I think these are some interesting questions about what is required in a revolutionary setting. They also kind of say, well, Rodney also understood the reasons for the use of state power to suppress certain elements.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not a Stalinist view. That is a view of revolution. Like, if you have a revolution in a colonized setting, say for example you have an opposition that is tied to the US, hint hint, maybe it would be important to rein that in and to make sure they're not tying themselves and getting money from this big bad force that has a history of doing things. I mean, it's kind of funny and stunning because the US, I'm not saying this is what they're saying, but the US does that anyway with smaller countries. You can't be part of this and funnel this
Yeah.
and whatever. So it's like, so times that by a million. Hint, if you're Venezuela, I'm just going in, and you have this context where Maria Machado is like talking about democracy while meeting Congress members in the US and saying, thank you, Trump. Like, why wouldn't you?
And giving her award to him and trying to and all of that. I
And having
mean,
that face, like that
yeah.
that face of a, to be really honest, of a crazy person, where she's like, I am so into this, I love this man. You wouldn't. I think Walter Rodney, the thing that was frustrating was, again, that sort of, they were couching a lot of things into Stalinism, if that makes sense. That was my critique.
Mm-hmm.
They were couching a lot of things in the easy critique of tankyism, which they don't mention, but they obviously are trying to say, oh, you believe in maybe some mode of state power, or you believe in some mode of making sure that the pathway to transition is more easier. That's Stalinism. That's not what he even said in that essay, as far as I read. So that was my first immediate thought when I was reading that intro.
There is a line. So again, this is sort of my point that you, even in what you just raised there, I just don't know enough about Stalin and didn't read the what I've read in the Rodney Russian Revolution book closely enough in terms of what he was and was not saying about Stalin to assess, so but when you say what you said, like the bias that I'm sitting with now, it would make sense that even if Rodney is himself not taking an actual pro-Stalinist position,
Right.
that those wanting to safely place themselves within U.S. higher education would still want to make the point that, yes, we're talking about the Russian Revolution, we're talking about Rodney, but we're going to take that shot at Stalin just to make sure everybody is still comfortable with us,
Right.
and it reminded me, because now I'm bouncing back and forth, of something that, and I was hoping I could find it real quick, that Rockhill says in his book about the Frankfurt School, that it sounded almost like you might have been saying in your brief summary about Rodney and Stalin and Kelly and Benjamin, but I'm not fine, but it was something along the lines of the so-called progressive leftist Frankfurt School was more interested in calling out the the it was something about, they were more interested in calling out the communists for any negative state or labor movement involvement, rather than criticizing the imperialist or the capitalist world, which should have been obviously the focus of an actual left. If that made sense. In other, man, damn, I wish I could find this quote.
Well, can I just add
Yeah,
really
please
quickly?
go ahead, because
Yeah.
go ahead.
Again, my thing is also just repeatedly, Walter Rodney was just being a really good. He was actually being divorced from ideology to some point. Like, he was actually being quite neutral, or
Mhm.
looking at the facts, which is his standard, right? So he's kind of being docked for that slightly. And again, I repeat, it's not all Stalinism. Like, there are also, like, certain people do the thing where they look at governments that do certain things and movements behind them, quite honestly, where they are, like, for example, yeah, there are instances where there's going to be further of a fight after winning state power, where you have these constituencies that are there. Like, if it's Russia, it's the czarist people, might include some peasants, might include some working class in the colonized section. I mean, how many I'm going to talk about India. How many, like, you know what the Indian government did with the Rajput class, which is the king class that worked with the British? They kicked their ass to the curb. They gave them a pension so they don't have to be completely homeless, but they did that. And this is a very sock damn government, you know. And honestly, like, you should understand that. Is that Stalin? I fear like some people make these connections to revolutionary terms to also then make it easier to critique Rodney or other people.
Mm.
Like, oh, but is it like, also, I just want to say, like, we're not really sure if that was what all he was saying. Like, in that intro, they mentioned that he was actually talking about the colonized situation in parts of Africa, which, yes, like, if you are part of Angola and you just got independence from the freaking Portuguese, who are psychos, and then Southern Africa is right there, South Africa is right there with a part. Oh, what am I? And even if it's a black person, a white person in your midst, like, it's Angola, it's mixed. Why wouldn't I care what you're producing in terms of like propaganda and you? Oh, I'm just writing my newspaper and I just happen to say I want an intervention. No, we just had a year of bloodshed. So I just want to put that forward too, that it's also a little bit reductive for people to they just associate things that states do to Stalinism, which is quite inaccurate and very weird. And I want to also add this. There's also a weird thing where some people celebrate loss than they do contend with the hardship of victory. So, like the French Commune, every year there's an anniversary for the Commune that happened in Paris, right? Which is sad, but there's more of a loving reference to it among some sections of the Western left, where they died, not to be harsh, but they died en masse. And Marx did say you got to take over state power or something. But how is that more celebrated than the USSR surviving a lot of its own internal contradictions for a really long time, or Cuba, right? So that's all I want to add too. It's like, what is Stalinism too? Like, it's used as a way to also say China or Cuba or whatever. So to me, that's a bit frustrating.
Right, but if I'm following you, you can't celebrate. You're not allowed or not
Right.
encouraged to celebrate any survival of the Soviet Union, and that's why there's almost this immediate the Russian Revolution was cool, but then Stalin ruined everything, and then it's almost and everything after that is of no value at all.
Right. Well, Lenin, it's the history of Lenin was great, which he was, and then he died, and then it became bad. But also, the USSR had other leaders besides Stalin.
No, they
So that's,
didn't.
yeah,
No one
right.
else
Sorry. No, I'm
existed.
sorry. I'm
He
sorry.
was
I'm
he was
sorry.
all by, and that's the point Rodney brings up too. Like
Yeah.
he wasn't just all by himself. He just becomes
No.
a signifier. But just quickly, real quick, I've seen a couple things in the chat. Yes, the Mtume episode with Gabriel
Mhm.
Rockhill is really, really good, and people should absolutely check that out on Mtume's Patreon. And yeah, to Ricky's point, I was on my way there, but I found the quote. Um, and so I may have been right about what I was attempting to say, but I was slightly off in the specifics. So the point I was thinking of was here, where Rockhill is talking about the Frankfurt Scholars, and that he says that the Frankfurt Scholars were hired to focus on the purported anti-Semitism of U.S.
Mm.
workers rather than on the capitalist funders of fascism or the actual Nazis who were fighting a war against the Soviets. And in part, it's where Rockhill is talking about this similar conflation of Stalin and Hitler. They're all the same thing. You know, it's
Mhm.
it's it's
Mhm.
it's you know, or Stalin, and then nowadays it's Stalin, Hitler, and Mao. They're all the same evil. And a lot of what I think Rockhill is saying does overlap with our somewhat critique of that introduction in the Rodney book, in saying in having nominal leftists who are, as Rockhill describes, are actually anti-communists, falsely attributing all these problems or evils to one man in Stalin, and then equating those to what Hitler did,
Mm-hmm.
and then using that, as I just saw in another person's video this morning, who self defines as a progressive, but had to take that shot at Stalin on their way. It was quite timely, but it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But it was just the same kind of thing, like, I want to show some affinity for socialism, but not that Stalin stuff. And then
And it's a
because they
catch-all.
know it's a defense
Mm-hmm.
mechanism, because it's automatically attached to that, and then said that if, well, you can't be socialist because Stalin was socialist, and then therefore he was just as bad as Hitler, so therefore socialism. I mean, so anyway. Go
Well,
ahead.
also there's I did listen, speaking of like the media diet, because I think with Rodney there's so much that, because I just want Rodney is chill. Like he isn't saying Stalin is great. He's not making these pronouncements. But in that essay that I was like, and other work, he's just saying, wait, there's other people involved. That's all he's saying. And you know what I mean? And so for that, I just want to reference that, because that shows the level of how deep you have to go with purporting your good standard of revolution, or whatever they want to call it. Because he's also just being fairly accurate and measured, which is what,
Mhm.
like with China, for example, it comes up like I have issues with China, but I literally tell people it's okay. Like China's fine. You know what I mean? And I don't want them to be gone. I don't want them to fall apart. Like that's not what I want either. I'm not vying for that, but they're okay. And for that, you can also be docked for, oh, you're not really understanding the situation. It's like, I think I am. I'm following a very Rodney perspective. Like it's okay. Like we will see what's going on internally. If they become more quote unquote socialist or communist and have it,
I know.
that's fine.
I
But this,
agree.
yeah,
Rodney is chill. I don't know why that was funny to me too. I was
well,
just
I'm part of the Red Star Caucus. This is like a drop on the DSA. We have in our protocols, like once you join the group, this is how you should sort of behave, which is important. And one of the things it says, be normal. And that's what I always think when I think about Rodney. He was super normal. Like, you know what I mean? Like he just believed in things. He had supporters. He supported things, and then he changed his mind. And when he changed his mind, he was sometimes dicey, but usually very measured. And for that, he's being saying, like, there's just a lot of presumptions on him that I didn't see in his work. That's what you can go in on other people who want to be completely not deranged, but delusional in their own sense, right? Like, because Stalin did purge some people who were quite important, but Rodney didn't say that. Rodney is talking about traits of a state and traits of revolution that you do require. And what is authoritarianism? That's another thing that's just thrown around. Like, is it authoritarian when the federal U.S. government was putting down Confederates post Civil War? Oh, what should I do as a brat? Like, I don't even know. Like, oh no, don't, like, that's just, give him free speech. No, like, you were in warfare. So
look. First of all, I just love how, I mean, imperialism gets to cleanse itself of anything. So
mm.
people are like, slavery, genocide, colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
That was back then. It was a necessary. It was, look what we get from it. Look at the world we.
Right, right.
If a policy
Mm-hmm.
is developed by a communist leader that goes awry, then all of a sudden communism
Right,
has to just, that whole thing is just collapse that whole project. The whole
right.
concept is wrong because of this person or that person. But capitalism, oh no, 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 we good, we good. All of all of that war and theft and exploitation. Why are you focused on the little things? Because
Well,
we get
like Bernie Sanders said in his very brave statement with Maduro, he said, "Well, I understand Trump is awful, but Maduro is a corrupt and brutal dictator." So thanks for saying that. That really
thanks.
didn't undercut anything else you said in that moment. I'm really glad that the brutal and corrupt dictator got, I guess, kidnapped with his wife, and now they can't return to the country. But Mari Machado, this person who's like saying, and this is Sharice Burden-Stelly's, like, the real authentic theology of America is anti-communism, where she said in her speech, like, this country is free of communism. Thank you, Bernie, for citing that this man who's incarcerated is a brutal and corrupt dictator. So thank you, Bernie. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's wild.
I know.
All right, so okay, is there more you wanted to say about the Russian Revolution book? Should we move to the article now,
We
or
can we can we can move on to the article. I think it'll come up on its own just
okay?
because of like things that are happening in the piece. So I just I just want when I wrote to you I also wanted to do the intro and just see more about his life, but it was pretty fascinating. Other things that came up.
Yeah, and I mean we can always come back to it as
Yeah.
well, but okay, how would you like to proceed with and again, just coming back to it, when you read this, and again, we're talking about aspects of the international class struggle in Africa, the Caribbean, and America, from Walter Rodney, 1974. The link to this is in the show description. Um, why this article, and why do you think it fits well for our project?
Yeah, I think again it contains themes that come up in his other work.
Mhm.
Questions around how to develop revolutionary consciousness, momentum, and also the timeline is pretty important because this is at the time when, and he references it, Mozambique, Angola, Guinea-Bissau are pretty in the thick of it in militant armed rebellion, and they're winning. Frankly, and that's why the U.S. had to intervene with supporting apartheid South Africa. But by this point, I think in Guinea-Bissau, at least, Amilcar Cabral, another great leader, he was assassinated, I think, in 74 or 75. But by that point, without the UN or the US declaring them free, they had already taken over, the militant movement had already taken over a vast majority of Guinea-Bissau from the Portuguese. So I just thought for those reasons, it's just fascinating, the timeline. And also, again, how he sort of attacks different aspects of a certain version of Pan-Africanism was quite fascinating. And of course, I didn't expect this. I did not see this part when I first read it. But that last paragraph before he lists why socialism is necessary, where he talks about the Asian conference, I thought that was pretty great after I started reading it. I was like, oh, dope. Like he actually does talk about a certain thing that we're also interested by that is a reference point. Like I think what I said last time was that a lot of the things that people are trying to analyze, the liberal class, they're trying to do it in a way. I think I mentioned it on Matume Gant's show, but there's also an attempt by certain liberals and conservatives to reinvent revolution through their terms. By that I mean they want to somehow create a timeline where this analysis didn't exist, and it does.
And yeah, Cabral died and
Yeah,
was assassinated
in
and
73.
ultimately succumbed in '73. Yeah. So yeah, so well, since you brought it up, I'll work backwards in terms of my
Hmm.
notes on this because I actually when I read certainly this ending here, where Rodney is talking about the says coincidentally a conference of Asians is scheduled to be held in Tokyo next June at about the
Hmm.
same time as the Sixth Pan African Congress. And then next paragraph, the inference to be drawn from the above Asian analogy is that the goal of African people's unity is by no means inconsistent with a policy with a policy of drawing a line of steel against African enemies of the people and with seeking the closest working relations with non-African peoples to the extent that the latter are engaged in the fight against exploitation. And when I read this, I thought again, because it's come up recently elsewhere, including Cabral, and Cabral's statement to the conference, this being the roughly 60th anniversary of the Tricontinental Conference,
Mm.
where which was itself sort of a radical extension of the Bandung Conference of a decade earlier, or half a decade earlier, or whatever. But the point being that I wrote in my note here, DonutKing versus Bandung and Tricontinental Conference, that the narratives around the DonutKing and the Asian entrepreneurial example that Black people are meant to follow is, I think, a narrative response to previous generations attempting to unify, to say, no, if we're going to compare African and Asian communities, let's do it on the basis of their colonization and collective and shared collective struggle against imperialism. And instead of that being the focus, let's turn that tendency, or towards uniting or collectivism with other communities into these false comparisons that are based on entrepreneurialism and capital. So that's how I ended up, really how I read the whole piece, that so much of the narratives we're talking about in our project are evolved specifically to get rid of the Rodney-ism
Right.
in the world. And how much better would it be if the spaces I'm critical of, for instance, were using Rodney as a basis for assessing for developing a comparative analysis between Black and Asian communities, as opposed to, I don't know, something descended from the Brookings Institute or whatever. I mean, so yeah. That was one thing I thought of in terms of how he ends this piece and what he's talking about.
Can I add something real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah. I just wanted to add the trying to get rid of the Rodneyisms is exactly what I would argue, because when you read that last part, you also remember that for a long period of time, Asians were seen as enemy number one, tied because of the communism that was sweeping through China, Korea, and even parts of South Asia. There was a book I was gonna buy, but I resisted the impulse to get. But there's also a history of the United States CIA playing a role in parts of India that even did the right kind of communism, which was elect leaders from the CPIM party, which is my parents' party, Communist Party of India Marxist. That's in Kerala, which is in southern India. They intervened there. All that to say is that Asia was viewed as a problem. So this article just also should be a reminder, but people get shocked. I'm sure there'll be people who are raised and socialized and conditioned in a non-revolutionary society without this sort of access to this knowledge. I am always amazed when I read these texts. I always think about how the timeline's so different because of the following state suppression here and abroad, like putting away people as political prisoners, having that lack of elders in our community to talk to because they are literally fighting for their life. And then you have this cutting off of knowledge in that aspect. Like, people don't have to completely buy into what's going on, but I think what's missing sometimes is people buy in to the other things we've seen, like the podcasting that says, oh, go to this conference for entrepreneurial, or one of the podcasts I listened to for this project, Modern Minorities, which is hosted by two Asian Americans. This last part reminded me of that, because in their podcast, they go out of their way to talk about Asian and African American alliances, which is great, but it's literally through the lens of talking to executives. And also at the end, they have an episode that I did not want to listen to, where they talk about Trump as a problem, but they interview someone who left Fidel Castro's Cuba, and again is using sorry, it's in the I don't want to give you a prop, but I'm just saying that's there. So when you read this part, there is an attempt to create Asian and African solidarity, but to your point, it's without the rod. And not even that, it's almost like the Men in Black scene where they put up the little thing to your eye and want to zap you. That's what they want to do. It's not just enough to be like, oh, they're silly. Don't remember them at all. And that's what's going on as well.
That's a good point. Yeah. Are there any other points you wanted to?
No, you can leave. I have a lot of notes, but they're kind of just bundled together.
Well, what I thought I would do, I mean, I'm happy to go through the whole article,
me too.
but so I guess we can do that. But I did sort of highlight what I thought was for our project the key point, but I'll get to that. So what I'll do is I'll just go through. Let me know. I don't know. I'll go through what I've highlighted, and if there's something you want me to go back to that you wanted to cover or that I don't, then let me know. Or do you want?
No, we can go through. I have notes and stuff, but for me, it's just I have highlights like you do. I wouldn't mind just going through it piece by piece.
Well, I'm only just trying to avoid the time it would take to read the entire article.
Oh yeah. But I mean, if there's there's
that's all I meant by that. But at the same time, I don't know. I don't know. So,
let me see. There's a part.
Well, let me go ahead and skip to the part that for me this was the section where because as you said, there's a lot that he covers here that is reflective in his broader work and is of great value to so much beyond our project here. But this section, I think this was the section where because I thought he said some things that really, oh my goodness, summarize throughout the continent, none of the successful. Where is that part? I thought it was in these. Scrutiny. All right, let me do it this way then. Throughout. Oh, there it is. It is in there. All right. So these were the all right, so he says here, the petty bourgeoisie of Asia, Africa, and Latin America are a different breed. They cannot be described as entrepreneurs, pioneers, captains of industry, robber barons, or in any of the other swashbuckling terms coined to glorify the primary accumulation of capital. So I thought of, even within Black America, or even if we wanted to even to say internally to the United States, Asian America, broadly speaking, I already think fit into this category of not being able to be properly described as entrepreneurs, pioneers, or captains of industry. Frantz Fanon flays them unmercifully, but truthfully when he points to the shoddy, imitative, lackluster character of the African petty bourgeoisie. Their role in the international capitalist system has always been that of compradors. Their capital outlay might often be greater than that of a factory owner during the Industrial Revolution in England during the early 19th century, but in the present era of monopoly capitalism, it suffices mainly for chicken farms. In any event, most of the African petty bourgeoisie is not directly involved in the economic enterprises, their real sphere being the professions, the administration, and the military police hierarchy. They lack both the vision and objective based to essay the leap towards continental unity. Mm-hmm. So again, microcosming it all the way down to my narrow focus on African or Black America, mm-hmm. and its relation, comparative, to comparison to Asians in America. This makes perfect sense to me that this Black entrepreneurial petty bourgeoisie can only imitate, can be a comprador, is not really involved in the higher levels or the dominant level sectors of the economy. So when it comes to this Black entrepreneurial claim that Black business, or as we might come to in that discussion, even in the context of Taiwanese business, as Geechee and Cherie were talking about last night, the businesses that these communities are engaged in are not in the dominant sectors and are not capable of scaling to the ability of satisfying the consumer needs or wants of their own communities. They are relegated to beauty and restaurant touring and whatever. But they're not, but in terms of satisfying everything that a community would need or that a sovereign nation would need, they're not involved in that. They're not able to compete or to produce. And then in this next paragraph, a close scrutiny further reveals that the failure of the African ruling class to effect meaningful unity is not merely due to weakness, recalling once more the dismantling process which took place in Francophone Africa at the time of negotiated independence. It can be seen as the pusillanimity of the African petty bourgeoisie. And I had to go back and practice, and I still got it wrong. Pusillanimity of the African petty bourgeoisie in the face of the deliberate creation of non-viable dependent mini-states by France attests not merely to the strength of the colonizers, but also to fear on the part of the presumptive African rulers that larger territorial units might have negated their narrow class welfare. Right. Throughout the continent, none of the successful independence movements denied the basic validity of the boundaries created a few decades ago by imperialism. That line is the bar for me that I noted in my notes. Throughout the continent, none of the successful independence movements denied the basic validity of the boundaries created a few decades ago by imperialism. To have done so would have been to issue a challenge so profound as to rule out the preservation of the petty bourgeois interests in a compromise independence worked out in conjunction with international capital. And as I said in my notes to myself here, that the refusal to abandon the imperialist and capitalist terrain is mirrored in the narrative arguments taken up by the defenders of entrepreneurial solutions to political problems in Black America. Like this, because to do so would to give up their relative bourgeois position, or the aspirations to that position. But what I would mean by that is to say we have to abandon the terrain imposed on us, not just geographically, but narratively, that says the only pathway forward is through entrepreneurialism. Abandon your politics, abandon your radical organization, abandon all those left ideas, abandon unions, abandon the labor movement, abandon solidarity with other communities, abandon all of that and just focus on getting that bag. And that to me is so that's how, so I didn't, I'll stop with that. And but that's those two paragraphs for me were like, this is how I see Rodney informing, me at least, or our project here. This and why it's just this trickle down colonial narrative that we end up with.
No, that's also I just wrote wow or something next to the halfway point when he just talks about chicken farms, because it's also like he has 2-3 critiques of them. Like one is the sort of psychological critique, which is like they are delusional about how they view themselves, right? Whether it be African or African American or Asian American or whatever. He calls them all out. So they're delusional. But the other thing that's so useful is like to what you've been saying a lot in your work is like the material base is lacking too. So for his, that's the whole primitive accumulation is just a Marxist term for the slavery, the extraction, the colonialism, the imperialism that Europe did to get the resource that they needed to do what Marx said, which is, the cities of Liverpool were essentially built in parts of Africa because that was how it worked. And so in that view, they're also incapable because, again, where they're going to go, again, inherently it's wrong, but where are they going to go? Like to each other, within themselves. And they're also not going to be allowed because that terrain is different now. The bullies are not just, they've bullied the world into their image. So even as the UK drifted away, they just used the Americans to do their dirty work, but nonetheless, they're the banking infrastructure. So I just like that passage because I thought of it repeatedly throughout the piece, which is he always has like a dig at them because he's just so, like he calls it comedy, the Caribbean nations who talk about fighting apartheid, but are actively repressing their own left working class. But he also constantly has his material approach too, where he's saying they also just don't have the basis of what they think they're doing.
Right.
And then he hints, and I want to reference a book. I think I'm missaying her name, but Atom Getchua. She wrote a book called World Making, but it's ATOM. I think she's Ethiopian American, but she wrote a book where she talks about the history, which he references for a brief moment, where certain countries did believe in federations, like expanding the scope and saying we'll work together to create a bigger base. I mean, pan-Arab nationalism was that, where you had Syria become with Egypt for a hot second. And that was the way to go, because you need to work together to expand and create a bigger base of what you can actually do to fight the imperialist class and within. But that's what I was left with too. This really good standard of like the critique is look at these idiots and these imposters, but also they're also idiots because they don't even know the situation they're trapped in. And I wrote another thing really quickly. Their small short-term interests override the greater interests for everyone, but particularly the subjects they seem to want to rule, because the whole territorial disintegration that he's talking about is repeatedly a theme in the article, speaks to the fact that they're like, I'm you know what? I am happy with Zaire, which was Ghana, and Mobutu, our man in Kinshasa, which he mentions. But I'm fine with this because the self-interest, the short-term interest, is I can control this. I can manage it. But then again, he's talking about that as forms of interest. Like he's not just saying, oh, Mobutu is an idiot because of him, even though he was. he also has these shorter term class interests, professional interests, and that line where they think they're the owners of industry, but all they're basically doing is protecting tourist spots and corporations, I think is really interesting.
Oh, if we're talking about the same part, um, I I did highlight uh, this part here where he says,
Mm,
because again, I even thought of man, I thought of a lot of things, but I was thinking of this earn your leisure tour to the Africa Cup of Nations in Morocco
wow.
to
Okay.
promote their business interests.
Oh, they're
Because,
doing that.
oh, absolutely. They're
Ah.
proudly, we're talking about,
Hmm.
they went over to Morocco to not only see the Africa Cup of Nations, but um to engage in entrepreneurialism, Pan-African business,
Mm.
and which Rodney talks a little bit about in here. And I was trying to get it so it would show up a little bit bigger on the screen, but so forgive me, everybody. But it's not cooperate. But he says here, Pan-Africanism has been so flouted by the present African regimes that the concept of Africa is dead for
Oh.
all practical purposes, such as travel, and that the concept of Africa is dead for all practical purposes, such as travel and employment. The Africanization that was aimed against the European colonial administrators soon gave way to restrictive employment and immigration practice by the Ivory Coast, Ghana, Zaire, so on and so on and so on. Um, but his point, as I understood it, was that Pan Africanism as a concept has been reduced to really apolitical commerce, and I said this is exactly what is being done in the rebranding of these narratives today,
Hmm.
where Pan-Africanism, and there was this brother that I crossed paths with in here in the DC area who's gone over to Ghana, and I tried reaching out to him and even to raise principal brotherly criticism, because this whole thing is this is how I do Pan-Africanism business. And I'm in Ghana, linking up with Africans. And on the one hand, I'm like, yeah, this is great. Africans of the world unite. But
Right.
this is not for the purposes of commerce and trade and entrepreneurialism, disassociated even from discussions of radical politics and movements. Like they're not even like they're not even making the claim, at least overtly, that this is being done for some radical purpose other than some vague Pan-African unity that I see Rodney criticizing here. Because later he says, obfuscation of the nation, obfuscation of the notion of class in post-independence Africa has made Pan-Africanism a toothless slogan as far as imperialism is concerned, and it has actually been adopted by African chauvinists and reactionaries.
Right.
And so it's that's exactly, and my note is here. This is the EYL. Africa is dead, save for travel equals EYL. Um, uh, so yeah, I just again, I you know initially I just agreed because when you said we should read Rodney, because reading Rodney is always good for me.
Right.
But I admit I wasn't immediately clear as to where you saw the connection to our project until I read it
Yeah.
and was like, there it is. Like it's to me, at least this is how I'm seeing it. It's very
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah, no, I just thought of it because I was skimming some other articles of him just because it's part of my work, and having read How Europe Underdeveloped Africa a while ago, but skimming through, I was like, you know what? I think there's something here about his critiques, and then seeing that here was perfect. I didn't like, for example, there are parts of it that I did not imagine to be there, like the Asian stuff. So that was really just a nice little like
Bonus, yeah.
bonus, but everything else I kind of felt like it would be part of his development up to that point. Um, yeah, I think his also critiques of capitalism are like twofold. Like there is the level of, on the material basis, those who lead the nations themselves are they're being outpaced by material conditions. That's pretty much what's happening. Like their views of things, their attempts to control things. Because his critique is also of the OAU, the Organization of African Unity,
Mhm.
where he says like the irony. The other thing about, there's so much good stuff here. It's only just a few 20 pages long, but it's better than a lot of books. And there's a part where he says something that was also part of the whole like liberalism of discourse. So he does say something about how the countries in OAU present themselves as still holding on to that Pan-African legacy, because of the mass base that would be upset if they let that go, which is also interesting. And of course, they can't be outwardly saying they're anti-socialist, so therefore they develop concepts like I'm doing an African style of socialism or doing this kind of other new thing where he
Like
criticizes it.
yeah. Yep.
Exactly. He criticizes it. It's like, well, you're not really doing the thing you're saying because you're just doing stuff. So that's one thing. But then he also points out how um, the issue with capitalism too, and the issue with the text is so important because he does the twofold thing. Like you're being outpaced by the conditions you're in. So therefore, as much as you think you're controlling what you're controlling, it's happening. Like you are also just, you might think in your head you're going to all these fancy spaces, as Fanon would write. You're having the dance and parry. You're having a good time, but you're a clown. Like you're a crook. You're not doing the things you're doing, and that goes with Asian leadership. Like Singapore comes to mind. All these different places. It's not just about African leaders. Like it's Asian and Latin American leaders, but he also says capitalism itself inherent, which is really cool. Like he just mentions it. He makes a joke about one of the Kenyan newspapers who was commenting on who's going to be in the conference because like there's a back and forth, and he basically calls them out because they're saying why even invite Cuba? They're also doing this like right wing identity politics, and he also says Cuba should be allowed to go. So it's very interesting. But he eventually says their critique, because the right wing say of the African discourse is saying, oh, some of them are saying we need more African capitalists than Europeans. So some of them are doing that work. But he says that's also bad because capitalism itself inherently is bad. So I thought that was really good because there's always that level that I hear from people I know, family and friends, who do accurately say, well, so and so industry is very white or so and so industry is this. We haven't had our chance. And I do say eventually, even if we did, you do understand that we would require a whole mass of people to do the things that a few would want. And the other thing, which he also probably writes about, I think in his other text, I'm guessing because it's been a while, the private control of resources is the problem. It isn't like who's doing it. Like housing and healthcare should not be in the purview of whoever's in charge of like raising the prices or whatever. So again, in 20 pages, he covers more than in most books, and it's really stunning, but not surprising given the other work he's done.
Yeah, I mean, even in just what I have on the screen here, he covers so much of what even we've talked about just today. So, for instance, just going in order, uh, um, you know, even related to what we were saying earlier about Rockhill and the Frankfurt School,
Right.
he says here African leaders fight the bogey of communism or of communist threat rather than the reality of capitalist imperialist oppression. So that's why, you know, I don't know if he meant bogey as in uh, enemy attacker, or this was his way of saying boogeyman. But to
Right,
me, it was
right.
the same kind of thing. It's this the shibboleth, the shibboleth, the facade, the ghost, the specter, quote, you know, as Marx would have called it, of communist threat rather than, you know, so it's the same kind of thing we see even among the liberal left or progressive so-called here in the United States today, where, as we were talking about earlier, there's this incessant need to include some sort of shot at communism, even as they're making a critique of what is a capitalist economy. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
and Rodney is saying here, stop going against the boogeyman or the bogey or whatever of communism and call out, because that's not what's really causing the problem here. The idea
Right.
that black people in the United States might talk about socialism is not why black people are poor or formerly enslaved or currently colonized. The reasons for that are imperialism, colonization, whiteness, et cetera, and so forth. So I thought that was interesting. Right, on the next paragraph, the African petty bourgeoisie as a ruling class use their state power against socialist ideology, against the material interests of the working class, and against political unity of African masses. He said earlier on the page, even the more progressive of this ruling class harbor and protect local reactionaries while neutralizing or eliminating Marxist and other left-wing movements. Back down
Right.
here, in one sense, the unwillingness of the petty bourgeoisie to manifest overt hostility to socialism and Pan-Africanism, to the point you were just raising, Sudip, is a testimony to the development of mass consciousness and to the level of confrontation between progressive and reactionary forces on the world stage. the OAU is the principal instrument which legitimizes the 40 odd mini states visited upon us by colonialism, which is the critique you were just.
Oh, can I add some? I forgot
No,
my
please. Yeah, go ahead.
the
Yeah.
OAU. So the other thing he said that was really, 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 really astute that I had to like. I read this a couple of times. So he does say that yes, there's now this quote unquote unity through the OAU, and he does give them credit because I read some of the resolutions, not all of them, that he mentions. He mentions I forgot the first one, Lesotho resolution, and then he mentioned the Mogadishu one, and I think he mentioned one of them for being more for armed struggle, and one of them kind of is like they did come to the agreement that they will recognize Palestine and the PLO, which is great. We're talking about the 70s, all the African nations involved. And they do also say we will now fund or help our brothers down in the southern half, which is fighting against Portuguese and against apartheid. So they do say that. But the thing that was so interesting about his critique is deeper than that, because he says, so the OAU also includes like Zaire and other countries like that. And so the irony is like, so within themselves, they have this like rule now, you can't interfere with one another, right? So they're just saying like even promoting unity of a real type is interference. So that's like the honorable system. But like countries like Zaire and became Congo again, but then they're allowed to do their own little treaties with bigger forces that then change the scenario. So I found that so interesting because we see that now with how Rwanda is used with the United States. Like, oh, I'm just Rwanda. Like, I'm just one country. I have a right to assert my individualness with the other countries that happen to be the United States. Funded like it was so like I was like it took me a little to understand what he was saying, but he was basically saying liberal, and this is a Lesotho critique, but Rodney's. This is a liberalism. Liberalism itself creates a world of principles that are very antithetical to revolution. Like, oh, interference is bad, so you make your treaty. I mean, but no, like you're literally creating another contract with a Belgian mine company. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what are you talking about? It's going to affect me on my border. It's going to affect you. Like, you don't have that right. But then under liberalism, you have that right, which is, again, inherently anti-revolutionary. And one could argue if other countries really impose and they invade, is that like, there's a whole conversation about authoritarianism again. It's just, he was really going after things that I needed some time to process. I thought that was really, really amazing how he said that.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, Rodney's doing a lot in this relatively short
Right.
amount of work, and yeah, I you know have yeah, I mean, I just gleaned from it what I, yeah, what I basically already said here in terms of our project.
And
Was there more? Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead. Yeah.
with the last part too, you said, so there's a lot of thoughts here. So he's obviously referencing Mobutu. I thought of Papa Doc in
Mm-hmm.
Haiti because he's not saying I'm attacking the people who are totally like speaking that they're back in the colonial days, like but they did present a form of quote unquote African culture that he would critique, and Fanon did, as not being real either, because it's all like a fabrication of what works for their own political terms. Like one of
Right.
which is Marxism is antithetical to Africanism. And the same thing with Asian stuff. Like you can see people who are saying things like in Singapore earlier, or even other parts of Asia who were against communism. No, no, no. We have our Buddhism, we have our monarchy, we have this. It is a form of decolonization rather than anti-colonization that bleeds into still a revival of power structures that are quite awful. Because one could argue, for example, in India, there's some elements of the Hindu right that are obsessed with women wearing jeans, right? Like they're like, oh, you shouldn't wear these Western clothing, but they don't say a peep. I mean, that's stupid enough, right? But they don't say a peep about capitalism. They do say things about socialism and communism again, like, oh, this is Euro imposition of certain rights. But again, the cultural arguments being made, I think that's what Rodney was also pointing to. Like, there are going to be people who are going to use culture as a manifestation of some sort of naturalness, which itself is political.
And that's why that discussion with Cherie and Geechee last night becomes even more relevant. That exact point, because that exact point is made, particularly at the end of the interview. That is one clip from last night that I want us to play before we wrap today.
Yeah.
Because it really makes that point. But but before we move on to your point, what Rodney, I mean, he does make that point, and it's very similar. And I'm going to keep using it, so I will continue to credit Vijay Prashad for this way of phrasing it. That national liberation from imperialism creates sovereignty, which is important, but it does not, in and of itself, bring dignity to the people, which is where you are required, which then requires socialism.
Mm-hmm.
And so in other words, and when Rodney says, but like Pan-Africanism, negritude in the hands of petty bourgeois black states becomes a sterile formulation of black chauvinism, incapable of challenging capitalism and imperialism. It's that same kind of, I hear him saying something very similar, that we cannot just make claims of decolonizing to some pre-colonial cultural position and expect that will in and of itself be enough. And we have to be aware that this is also being used by some in the aspirational black ruling elite to protect their own class position. So if we don't add something specific to the material conditions, i.e. socialism, to the argument, we leave ourselves open to this black-led chauvinist, so on and so forth. And when I'm looking at the folks in the black financial literacy media ecosphere or whatever, I see them making much the same kind of argument. They're making a depoliticized cultural argument about vague black unity, but that is that is overtly anti-socialist, anti-Marxist, anti-materialist, anti-scientific social, all of those things, and therefore would only lead to the creation of this beautiful black community that has this 20% of the population owning everything, or whatever. And that's what I see Rodney here criticizing as well. And again, it's even in his discussions of unity with non-Africans in the piece we're talking about, in the hands of reactionaries, that argument is condemned based on, oh, well, that's because Rodney just doesn't want to, he's Eurocentric and doesn't want to be, he's not nationalist enough, he's not wanting to just be in an all black space, he's this, that, and the third. And Rodney is saying, as I read it very differently, no, it is because I love black people and recognize how the world is interconnected. And the way imperialism seeks and whiteness seeks to divide us, we have to be willing, as he says, as long as, how did he phrase it? As long as, to the extent that this latter non-African community are engaged in the fight against exploitation as well. Like, so as long, and so he's saying, as I read it, we cannot allow the petty bourgeois among us to use racialized arguments and claims of national sovereignty to confuse us that they're actually not against imperialism and that they're actually not against the terrain geographically, economically, narratively that has been laid out by imperialism. They're for all of that. And they're just wrapping themselves in some beautiful black excellence, or to the extent that's similar in Asian excellence and community, and going back to DonutKing narratives. I freed myself from East Asia and came over here to the wonderful United States and took over the donut world. Why can't black people do it?
There's a couple of things I want to say as related to what you just mentioned, because he is attacking those reactions. Like the solidarity thing is so interesting because I can see it from all sides. Like some Asians saying, well, the African experience is not our experience, and the culturalist thing, like everything is about an Asian culture, which is so bizarre. Like I've heard people talk to me about the Asian culture who are Asians, and I think to myself, like, I'm sometimes in a position where I don't know what to say. I just don't know what to say, because that's a pretty big claim. Even African culture is a pretty big claim. But the thing about him that's so interesting too, he is specific too, which is also missing from a lot of analyses. Like, I know what you mean by imperialism, which is like the US and the Europeans. And he says it in the last part where he says in some of the points of what he hopes the conference will focus on and decide. He calls out Western Europe, the US, and Japan. Like, we need to. So the other thing, because it rotates back to our earlier conversation about how that intro to the Russian Revolution book, like the people behind those intros, I have a lot of respect for, but there is sometimes a discourse where imperialism, like it's Russian, it's this, it's that. JFK did a speech where some people thought it was really nice to bring up because he calls out U.S. chauvinism and imperialism, but he also says Soviet imperialism. So that's the other. So I feel like we are interested in attacking and challenging certain discourse, which is we're in a timeline where the discourse is very non-revolutionary from the progressive end and even from the reactionary end. Even like what he said about some people not wanting to condemn socialism but create their own. I always like thinking to myself, if only we had that problem too. Yeah, exactly. If we had that problem too, but we don't. But he is attacking all these different strains that he really feels will be a problem. One of which is the reactionary nationalism, which is, we're Asian, we're Black, we're Latino, we're Argentinian. We have a inherent culture that is just not capable with Marxism, not just communism, Marxism. But then he's also attacking people who might go the more revolutionary route, because he says something about George Padmore in the text too, which I had to look up because I wasn't entirely sure. But what I gathered was George Padmore was still a socialist in this context of Guyana, which is where Walter Rodney's from too. But he did take a position where he also was worried, I think from what I gathered online and little pieces with the piece, that he also took this position that Rodney was upset by, because it was not, this is the key thing, a materialist position. I think Chedi Gagan, who was a Indo-Guyanese socialist, had won the elections of newly independent Guyana, and he also had a white wife. But the thing is, he was a socialist and a communist, and he did receive some sort of support from the Soviets, and I think visited or whatever. So he was Soviet aligned in the sense, like, he did not view them as like necessarily the problem, and probably smartly would have asked for their help if there was a situation where he was in power more. He was eventually couped and had to leave in exile. From what I can gather in that piece, George Padmore did not side with him, probably because of this other approach of socialism, which we were kind of hinting at, which is like, well, the Russians are involved, so it's bad. But with Rodney, what I like about him is that Rodney said and is saying, because he's calling out Padmore in this article, you're not being materialist. Like, are you really measuring it's the British who are still involved in Guyana? You can say all you want to say and you can have your critique, but you're not being materialist. You're actually being extremely abstract and idealist. And that's the thing I really like about him too, is that in the end, he points out who he's against.
I do remember that in Frances Stoner Saunders' Cultural Cold War book, she points out that Western intelligence agencies were happy that Padmore concluded that Pan-Africanism as opposed to communism was the way to go
Oh,
for
wow. I didn't
Africans.
even know that. Okay.
So
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
just leave that out there. So
Huh.
yeah, Rodney is basically calling that out. He says, like other African leaders, they too propagated the false antithesis between Pan-Africanism and communism, an
Right.
intellectual activity spearheaded by no less a person than George Padmore. So Rodney, yeah, to your point, he's saying in real time, we have people conflating and confusing. And in 2026, to your point, I mean, what Rodney was saying in 74 has hit hyperspeed. I mean, it's we've completely lost hold of what Pan-Africanism means. And then it can be redefined in so many different ways, and then is used in its most reactionary definition as a way for some very reactionary groups currently in the United States to use to attack the concept of Pan Africanism. So, but again, that's why what I love about what you in this suggestion for our project is that Rodney is, to your point, he's saying let's not lose sight of the the materiality involved in these racialized social constructs and claims of community. In other words, this idea that this fantasy of a racialized Black unity and this even greater fantasy of a racialized entire Asian
Mm.
community that encompasses every Asian extract possible, to say that one group, quoting John Hope Bryant, got the memo and can figure out the financial necessities to save itself, and this other group, Black people, just can't do it, just can't get themselves together.
Right.
And what Rodney, as I understand him, is saying is to the extent any of this is real, it's connected to very
Mhm.
material, policy-driven, historical realities that have nothing to do with these fantasies, as he's critiquing, of negritude for Africans, or as we would be talking to, I don't know what the Asian equivalent of negritude would be, but again, this pan all Asian category, that would have everyone from India to Vietnam having some common unified
Well,
monolithic
yeah. Well,
perfect
can
cultural.
right.
Oh my God, this is
Well, the thing about that one too, I do want to bring up, like, I'm fine with now bringing up some names because I already did a book review of this one person's text, and uh but there's a book that's called Loneliest Americans. I'm not The Loneliest Americans by J. Caspian Kang, and I did already a review of his a couple of years ago when it came out. It got a lot of good reviews from people, and it was on like the Barnes and Noble, like when people there working, suggest a book. I'm kind of thinking the other way too. Like, I do get frustrated with certain people who talk of an essentialized Asian characteristic. Like you said, like someone mentioned to me Asian shame, Asian guilt, like to me. So they included me. And I was like, that's just shame and guilt. Like, that's just a personal quality that people have. And the reason why I like the Rodney approach is because
because
I
he's
keep
saying
telling,
there's no African socialism. It's just
right,
socialism.
right,
There's no
exactly.
Asian
There's no Asian, like,
shame.
if the thing is, like, if there's an older Asian woman who might be a little bit difficult in terms of like her self-doubt, then it takes up the space of like, oh, she's just East Asian, even from other Asians, like, oh, you know how we are, we just have a lot of shame. No, you have bad knees, you can't get up the steps. Like, this is you're living in a bad place, you should have an elevator. It's not shame or guilt, or you are not working hard enough to climb up those steps as an older person. So it's all that. And I think with Rodney, what's so impressive, he also just in one passage reminds you that the Asian context was radical. Like, that's the other thing I tell my
That's a
students
good
is like,
point. Yeah,
kids, like, you, I shouldn't say kids because you're,
kids,
yeah, I know, sorry, I'm an older
kids
millennial.
today.
Kids today, they don't like Kendrick as much as I do, but oh god, such new music. But yeah, I do by mistake say that, but I do tell them, like, the Viet Cong, like, again, the Cold War culture, that was um Asia, like Korea, Vietnam, China was the horde. Like, these things are now reinvented to do the thing you said about Rodneyism. Like, it never happened, like a cloud. But one thing I do want to say about the J. Caspian Kang, the reason why I reference his work, I actually think Rodney would critique him too on a different scale.
Mm.
I do agree. Pan Asianness could be a problem, but I'm actually not for post Asianness either. So, for example, in his book, he puts forward this, like, a bunch of random anecdotes about, if I'm going to be real, because I already wrote a book review, random anecdotes about Asianness being such a complicated thing. And also, to your point, but you're credible in saying this, he's not saying how there isn't a post Asian, there isn't a Pan Asian. But when he does it, it's very like non-materialist. So he's like, what's the connection between an Indian doctor and, say, like a Cambodian garment worker, American, which is true. But I would argue, are you suggesting that there's no Indian garment workers? Like, that's the thing. So my
Mm-mm.
critique of his book was actually, I'm actually kind of in the middle, just like Rodney. Like, he didn't give up the ghost about Asianness. He just said, look at the Asianness radicals, what they're doing, and how they're, again, using a materialist analysis to find those connections, like gender and class. His book goes in and says there's no such thing as Asianness. There's that approach. And he's written these articles in the New York Times. We should start, and it's very deeply psychological. It's just a change of terms. We should start using the term of immigrant so we can connect with Latinos and everything. But I'm like, but what about the actual immigrants who are, and that's a structural question. I am brown. I am carrying my passport these days because I am brown, and it's really scary. But materially, it's someone who is undocumented, who is also like Pakistani or Bengali, they're structurally in a worse position. You see where I'm going? There's structural things to understanding all of this, even the Asian stuff. Because some of my students say like, "Oh, this proves that there's no Asianness." I'm like, "Wait, hold up. You don't also have to go the other route completely. Like the working class is the most diverse, but would we argue that it doesn't exist?"
Right.
So that's the same thing I think about
Right.
this.
Right.
So if I had longer arms, I'd pull the book down, but it was everywhere. And I did not like that book. And I'm proud to say, because it's been a couple of years, that that's what brought to my mind. Like, what happened to this part of the Asian American experience
But
that
it's
should
not
have
that
been in
there
that book?
aren't collective experiences to be investigated. But what I think Rodney is being clear about is that there is a class basis, a
That's
materialist
the thing.
basis to doing it.
That's the
So
thing.
that's why he's saying,
Mm-hmm.
I want African people around the world to be free, but I recognize that that also means a number of things, including getting rid of these concepts of these nation states imposed on us,
Right.
and getting rid of blind obeisance to racial unity, and saying that in some cases we have to get rid of these African compradors and side with and
Right.
unify with non-Africans who are actually committed to ending exploitation. And it should not be read, and I don't think can honestly be read as some sort of compromise with an affinity for blackness and black people in Rodney's case, or the equivalent from any various Asian community. But it's a recognition of the material conditions and the need, what steps are needed to turn them over. So I um only because it can. So let me ask you. I want to make sure we don't. Uh, I'm I'm admitting I'm feeling a little pressed to move on,
Mm-hmm.
but not necessarily legitimately. So I want to make sure I'm not rushing you past Rodney's article. If there's more you wanted to get to from it
No, I
as it
think
relates, yeah,
the only thing just for our research, and we can talk more another time with another, because he's just a lot of stuff that's so relevant to what you said. Exactly that. It's just that when he was presenting the Asian side, and first of all, he paid the ultimate sacrifice anyway. Like he went to back
absolutely,
to Guyana, and
right,
he died. He was killed very young,
right,
and he was just a great. From everything I read, he's a great father, husband too. Like he was trying to put food on the table and did lots of things between gigs because he also lost his professorship in
yeah,
Jamaica. So
yeah,
this is a man who sacrificed way more than everyone combined in the podcasting world. But the only thing I want to add with the Asian stuff too is Asian Americans right now materially have a slightly higher middle class, but just like what Rodney would, because if you use the Rodney analysis, he would say, but the overall space within you're in is bad. So even if you're an Asian working class person or an Asian professional class, you exist in a space where there's still precarity.
hmm
You could lose your access to everything because of your job. And frankly, you're just decomposing because you're running so dry, like you're just running after opportunity. So there's that analysis. And then really quickly, the Asian part is still there. So to what you said, it's just that in the J. Caspian King book, I'm just saying, like in books like that, because it's a liberal book, and he does a good job on his podcast. He's like socialist, leaning. But in that book, he doesn't reference any of this
mm,
analysis. So to our point, there is this sort of rejection, but I would also argue again revisionism of a certain type, where certain people just put forward these analysis of grand things like Asianness and what does it mean to be Asian, because that's his book. And there's nothing in, like, they're trying to reinvent the wheel and struggle through it like a philosopher, but it's free on communist.org or marxist.org. There's an article that we just read that would suffice to explain, hey, maybe think through a materialist analysis and you can find a connection even among Asians. So that's all I wanted to say. Yeah.
no, that's a really good point. I mean, because even it comes up in even these documentaries we've been reviewing,
Yeah,
like in the
Bad
Donut
Acts
King,
and DonutKing. Yeah,
they do all that, the Asianness of it. We're
right.
just so quintessentially Asian in our response to our
We're so
conditions.
Asian, we don't question capitalism. That's
No,
basically it. We just love to shop and
and we
become like
figure it out.
store. Yeah,
And
we
and
figure it out. Yeah,
and if
yeah,
I have to
yeah.
sell myself as a caricature to Hollywood, or sell
Right,
myself
right, right.
to and consign my grandchildren to 20-hour days in a donut kitchen, hey, we do it,
We do it. Yeah, we
and
just
then
have it.
black people pick it up in some cases with this, see, they did it. Why
Right,
don't I have my grandkids working 30 hours a day in a 24-hour a day working in the kitchen? But
right.
all right, so because I have to take a quick bio break and I want to set up this video. I want to play one quick thing so I can set up why we're moving into this section, and then I want to play an excerpt from last night's discussion on Dare to Struggle, Dare to Win, featuring Geechee and Cherie on Black Liberation Media. That I think, and we can look at more if you want, but that I think summarizes perfectly. But first, I want to start with this right here.
He gonna crash out.
Oh wait, I missed it.
All these women gals and
Shirley, he went fishing, and he was like,
I thought I had it. Dang.
It's gonna be a little interesting. I appreciate Miss Shirley and her thing, but so that's it. That's all. See y'all soon. Thank y'all for tuning in. We'll be back again next week, maybe.
I really want to know Jared's thoughts on this. I literally want him to do like a whole I mix what I like on this episode. I really want him to I want him to pause and talk. Like, I really am curious of like his I would love for him to break this down.
All right, so just so we're clear, I'm going to cue up this next part, but that's just so I'm showing the evidence.
Right.
I was specifically requested, and shout out to Cherie and Geechee, and if you know, when called, when the bat signal goes up. So let me just play this. I want to play a little bit where Geechee sets up this question for their guest, Dr. Joey, who now. Just a quick bit of context. The conversation, Cherie sets it up at the beginning that she was just seeing online the work of Dr. Joey around financial literacy and some sort of a new critical way of engaging entrepreneurialism to satisfy radical movements in politics. And there was a lot of contradictions and I, some confusion perhaps. But eventually they get to this, and Dr. Joey has returned to where she's from originally in Taiwan. So this is an important part of the context as well that sets up this next sort of question and her response. So I'm going to play this. I'm going to take us off screen for a quick second, run to the restroom, and then I'm going to ask Sudip and everyone to listen and see if you hear and see what I thought I see and heard in this, and why I'm thinking this fit perfectly, not only in terms of responding to Cherie's request, but in adding some substance and depth to our project and the work we're doing here. So, and I'll put the I'll put the link to this whole discussion in the show description if people want to watch the whole thing. But let's just pick it up here, and I'm going to take us off.
And I don't know that I would say business as we know it, especially most of us who are Black and brown, who are unfortunately speaking this crazy ass language. I don't know that when
members don't have to
revolutionary
in a non-extractive way, then we can also make sure that our community members don't have to over rely on these corporations that are already hoarding wealth and state infrastructure.
Y'all using a couple words that I'm like, huh? What you said, revolutionary business and non-exploitive or non-extractive profit. These are new concepts because they normally like run into each other. So really quickly, I think so I'm trying to follow, and I'm hearing again, like there's a commodification of human basic needs. And I don't know that I would say business as we know it, especially most of us who are Black and brown, who are unfortunately speaking this crazy ass language. I don't know that whenever we started thinking of what they are telling us as business, I'm not sure that it was ever to help the community. You might think that it's to help the community, but essentially you're trying to sell people something that they don't have. And so I'm curious if whatever this thing that we're trying to struggle, capitalism, imperialism, exploitation, whatever, I wonder if you, and let me back up. I think there are a bunch of full of shit political organizations, and you can get in organizations and waste your motherfucking time. So I would say that. But are you suggesting that these people that you are working with, they have some level of individual empowerment? And what does that mean to them as it relates to politically organizing? Because I don't want to, limit my mind to hair. Is she talking about personal empowerment or dismantling systems? And then how is this personal empowerment going to dismantle the system? So I wonder, like, where does like the political work, the political organizing go as it relates to these people with a business solution or a business attempt?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious why. I feel like everything that I've spoken about doesn't replace or contend with political organizing. Does it in your mind?
Well, I think it has to be, and that's why I'm asking about organization, because if it doesn't interact with, then so for instance, like the US government, as crazy as they are, like they knew for a fact to get people away from political power, they had to realign their minds about how to build economic power, and they thought it was separate. So that's why, Nixon and others would be like, well, we need to get these Black folks away from talking about Black power, and they need to have Black banks and Black businesses. They deserve to have Black banks.
Yeah.
So
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, so I'm curious about, like, how do we make sure that these business owners who you're educating are not going in this thing for personal empowerment, and they are actually equipped to change systems or destroy or dismantle systems? And then, like, what type of capital do they even have to be in these space? Like, do they have? I got a lot of questions, but
I love having this dialogue. So the first thing, I think the biggest contradiction that I think you're speaking to, I'm really curious, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it's historically situated, one, in the United States, right? As a context.
Kind of. Well, so I lived in Central America and the UK for a total of 4 years. And so for instance, just like they had circulate the Black dollar in the US, I heard people talking about circulate the Black pound in the UK. Mm-hmm. And then obviously in Nicaragua, they've on the other side of this thing, but in Costa Rica, they are absolutely. So for instance, like I just came back maybe a month ago, and I was talking to an artist who's in school. He wants to open up his own art gallery. He's working at a restaurant. And I said, hey, like, are there stores and things that, and most of the artists in the whole country has to gravitate and sell their art or get their art mass produced, which takes money out of them, and go and adjust to the tourist industry that comes in. So it's like, it's no longer art anymore.
Yeah.
And so, so
notification. Mm-hmm.
So Costa Rica, I mean, Jamaica, the UK and the US is kind of the framework I'm talking about in terms of, like,
I get you.
Trying to, go ahead.
I think what I am still seeing, so please correct me if I'm wrong, is even in these cases that you've named, we're talking about sort of reactive, smaller scale solutions to, I think, what I'm talking about, which is it's reacting to the existence of imperialism already imposed on the people, right? We're talking about a context that exists after the transatlantic chattel slave movement, or chattel slavery has already existed, where we have people who were denied their liberties, right? Bodily autonomy, who were the most exploited, right? For profit. And then we're talking about a history after that of trying to regain autonomy, right? And so all of this is contending within an economic system that's already been established as the most extractive form of capitalism that the earth has ever seen. So that's why when I started the conversation, I asked us to stretch our entire worldview out a little bit and say that's actually in the greater scheme of history, that's a relatively new idea. So not to say that the political organizing for this moment is wrong. It's absolutely necessary. We're still contending with this very sinister, very oppressive, very extremely extractive and exploitive system. But what I'm playing around with here is, and not just me, but synthesizing.
So just quickly, what I'm hearing, the reason I played this section is because what I'm hearing is Geechee's raising a question around, really what I hear him saying is, Dr. Joey, you're arguing that entrepreneurialism can solve the material conditions imposed on various communities. And you have, and she attempted throughout the interview to frame her work, although it really wasn't very clear, I thought, but to frame her work around sort of rebranding or redefining what entrepreneurialism is, and saying that business can be revolutionary and be used to fund revolutionary activity. In fact, she proposes business as an alternative to grant writing or other forms of fundraising that wed you to the state and then give you this level of autonomy. And so she's basically arguing that commerce among oppressed communities within those communities can give them a level of autonomy and resources to fund radical movements that you can't get elsewhere. And so I'm hearing Geechee try to raise a critique around that and bring into the question this history of you're ultimately making an argument that the state has wanted to evolve as a dominant narrative to get Black people away from more radical forms of organization. So that's why I just want to set up, because she says something next that I think follows from this but I wanted to importantly, stop for a second, just clarify what I'm hearing in what she's saying. Okay, let me just keep it going here a little bit more.
Many different strands of scholarship. What happens when we pull our imagination out on either end?
And by focusing on the particular experiences of African descended people in this hemisphere, she seems to be suggesting that previously existing forms of capitalism or other forms of capitalism and exchange are discouraged or unknown because of the form that capitalism took in imposing itself on these most, as she kept saying, most exploited. So she's almost, in the context of the full conversation, it seems like she's trying to say that capitalism isn't in and of itself isn't as bad as it has been suffered by African people, and therefore can be used. So anyway, all right. So that's all right. Here we go. Just now we
go. What existed before capitalism? What did our ancestors know before capitalism? So when you say businesses can't exist as a function of the community, right? As in service to the community, can we look before colonial imperialism and say, what did our ancestors know about the specialization of trade, apprenticeship to a certain trade? What do they know about helping?
And here I heard her saying doing a version of negritude that Rodney was critical of.
One another with their gifts that they had, their trades. Why were there people that were designated as the seamstresses, as the storytellers, as the house builders, as the leaders? Like, we have models that can be looked at to understand where we're going in the future. So I'm pulling, can we get beyond just a reactive, not saying that we abandon those movements still need to exist now, those political organizing and contending with the state problems.
And then she's saying here that radical movements, anti-colonial liberation movements, were having to react to the imperialism imposed on them, whereas pre-colonial forms of business and commerce and exchange could be tapped into as a replacement. And so a little bit more, but I'm just like, this was so, I found very much a lot to struggle with.
We have right now need to exist, but some of us have to also be doing the work of wondering, what do we grow in the gaps? Once we've dismantled this state, right? What world exists afterwards? Because what's going to happen if we don't start to imagine and at least experiment and at least start to counsel with one another and create the culture, create the infrastructure for that, is that we can pull this whole system down. We can have, liberation, and then people without another option, another education, another imagination to live into are going to revert back into all that they know.
Mm-hmm. Makes me realize I still need to finish The Sky Full.
So, all right, maybe, again, I did this. I thought I had this part in there where she says something specific to Taiwan. Oh, man. Sorry. I thought, where was that part where she talks about, all right, hold on, because there's a part where I thought it was in that section where she because at one point she makes, and I'll look for it in a second, but she makes a specific point that in Taiwan, she says something to the effect that most of the goods and services people need are supplied by small family-owned businesses. And she's saying this to say that this is a model that can be expanded upon. And at one point, Geechee even asks her to send him some details and some information. And I look forward to seeing it if he does get this. But she's claiming that if we take, she doesn't say it exactly this way, but the argument is very much like, if we take this example of what the people in Taiwan are doing, other communities, similar, other oppressed communities around the world can see that they have solutions to their oppression that don't, she doesn't say it this way, but that don't require radical politics, and that can be satisfied through some sort of commerce and capitalist exchange if those businesses are just revolutionized. And she uses the word aqueduct at one point and says the business becomes an aqueduct through which profit is generated so that people can feed themselves, but that is primarily generated so that profit can fund other efforts, movements, and other things that we shouldn't have to rely on the state or grants to fund. And I thought, well, that's wild. So I don't pretend to know anything about Taiwan, but I looked up just one stat. And it says, I wanted to know the wealth gap. The richest 10% of the population holds approximately 60% of the nation's wealth, while the bottom 50% receives only 12% of the total income. So I don't pretend to want to take that one Googled stat and extrapolate a whole analysis. But what I'm suspicious of is this claim that she makes in a roundabout way that small family-owned businesses can be revolutionized to the point where they're generating enough profit that where the families running them can feed themselves, but also be funding. Because what I heard was, this is another version of what we hear here, that this Asian family running the corner store, if that was Black owned, would radically revolutionize the economy of the Black community and provide a wealth to the Black community that could be used to free ourselves, instead of this Asian community interloping and freeing themselves without ever exploring the condition of that family, the particular country they're coming from, the class position, none of that. So I just thought it was, I'm sorry I didn't have that. I was sure it was in there. I have it noted as being in there, but that it and I don't know if this is being sarcastic. I know Cuba has small businesses, but
they don't. Can I?
I don't even know if they're meeting. They might have been being. That might have been a joke. I don't know if.
Sorry,
I
noticed. because you sent me this yesterday, and unfortunately, because we live under socialism in America, I didn't have power from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So that was obviously because a small business wasn't running the building that I live in. So that's
No,
why
it was because some Asian company was running it. Had it been black,
or if it was Asian, just period. If it was just an Asian family owning it, I would be very. I would go to their apartment that's probably high up and be like, "Thank you. I didn't need power for 12 hours. It's fine." But I did watch a little bit. I'm sorry. I think I made some faces. I don't mean to be disrespectful. I didn't watch that part. I do remember the aqueduct part, and I kind of skipped ahead because I was lost. Because when I saw Geechee, I was like, "Oh," and then I was like assuming things about the conversation, and then when it went that way, I was really lost because she also mentioned, I think, an aspect of her work teaching people. So there's a bunch of word that she uses that's exactly what Rodney would have predicted. Like, okay, this is going to be kind of harsh, not to her, but just to a character of actual leftist. I think I posted this on like social media one time, but there is a tradition now of lefties who say things like, imagine, they'll say, use your imagination. And I've made kind of like, they'll say use your imagination rather than just use your eyes to like maybe check out what China's doing or something. You know what I mean? It's always imagine. It's like because we can't look there, it's imagine. So that's always baffling to me and funny. It's like, okay, well, yeah, I can imagine, but can we learn a little bit from things that are happening before or now? But there's none of that. She also mentions decolonial. I think she mentions like teaching business. So she separates capitalists. She makes capitalism an ideology. So you can be a business owner and not materially be a capitalist, which is wrong. You can be like Engels, be like pretty dope and like giving your friend money every month, but you're still a capitalist, right? Because that's the position. Different from a socialist, it's a position. So she basically redefined business owner from not being a capitalist. So she says at one point, she wants to teach business owners not to be conditioned by the ideology of capitalism. So I found that to be fascinating because she mentioned decolonization. So I found that really fascinating. And another thing is like the small business mythology. That's definitely in a lot of the stuff we've watched. Bad Acts, that documentary.
Oh man.
Let's talk about racism, but through this small, like it's a very comforting, like this small family, a Mexican-American woman, and then a guy from Cambodia. They marry. It is interesting, and they own a business in a very white part. And through the business it's a documentary, is a vessel for all these hard conversations. But never once do you gather like, okay, well, what about if it's just workers in another part, like Detroit or something? Because that place it's in Michigan. So that is there. The small business mythology, the cross-racial, cross-ethnic mythology system is pretty wild. Oh wow, okay, that's
no. She claims to be a socialist, and yeah. So again, in some ways, I'm not doing the conversation justice, and I thought I had clipped the part where that was most relevant to our project, but so I will put the link to the whole thing. I'll put in the show description. But at one point, and I thought it was very good the way. First of all, the whole thing. I thought the way Cherie set the whole thing up. Just saying, look, I'm trying to learn. I see you doing stuff online. I see your social media work. Let's have a conversation on my show. Let's build. And then I loved how Cherie and Geechee were polite, but trying to raise critical questions that pushed their guest a little bit. And in a way, it starts off quite funny because Dr. Joey is I don't think she was aware of the platform or but she kind of says, well, I don't know, to what extent you all talk about capitalism and financial literacy and all this other kind of stuff. It's like, well, I was like, well, quite a bit actually, but just as I was watching, but at one point, so what I'm saying though is that I liked how Cherie and Geechee were I think appropriately pushing a little bit. And at one point, Cherie says, look, I'm trying to follow what you're saying and, learn more about what you're saying, but I'm a socialist. Cherie's like, I'm that's how I get down. And the response was when she finally got back, and I wrote it down somewhere here. She says, that is, Dr. Joey says at the 50th minute, she self-defines as a socialist. And then I raised the question because she says she does not want state power. So in the context of the conversation, she's saying, I want to use the business. I want to use revolutionary business to raise funds so we don't have to get grants and be beholden to the state. But at the same time, she's self-defining as a socialist. And then at one point in her answer, in describing her socialism, she says that she's very, anarchic in her approach to socialism, because she talked about, once upon a time being willing to do this, that, and the third to get the. But now, after having a series of conversations with some fellow scholars and researchers, she's saying, we can radically build this business community that will fund radical movement. And then, she sort of slips in this at the part I was trying to show, this reference to really what I thought she was saying was, you all, the standard argument, you all in the African world, in the Western Hemisphere, have been divorced from your cultural moorings, your pre-colonial culture.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So you don't have that to fall back on the way we in Taiwan do. So I'm interested to know, well, what is that's what I heard her saying. She didn't say it this way, but that's how I heard what she was saying. So it's like, because I have this Taiwanese history and pre-colonial culture to the extent that exists, and I don't know enough about Taiwan to know to the extent that there is whatever she's referring to as this pre-colonial culture that can be tapped into, where family and small businesses can be reorganized to not only produce the goods and services that people need, but to do so in a way that's going to produce a profit enough for those families and then to fund a revolution.
Weren't the original Taiwanese almost wiped out by Chiang Kai-shek?
This is what I'm saying. I'm way out of my depth here. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm way out of my depth. So that's why I just did this but I'm just sharing with you all my my method. And one of the first things I will do is just do a quick Google search. Well, what is the wealth distribution of this utopian community? Like I just want to start there. And when I see that, what is it? 10% got 60. What was it again?
10% has 60% of the wealth.
10% got 60%, and 50% got to live off of 12% of the income of the nation. I'm like, and then by the way, when you look a little beyond that, like a lot of the GDP of Taiwan apparently is not generated from small family-owned businesses, but the semiconductor industry and all this other kind of stuff, which, to my previous point and to Rodney's point, are not accessible sectors of the economy to colonized populations who would then be able to take over the semiconductor industry and turn it into what produces a genuine socialism for the Taiwanese people.
This is, well, I wrote so the small mythology. No, I'm now getting it because can I be honest? I do appreciate the conversation, and I'm fascinated by this more and more, because I did not watch that clip. Because when you first sent it to me, I was like, "What is this?" And I just clicked on it. I was like, "I'm so confused," because I thought I was mishearing it. I thought I was
and I didn't want to editorialize at all. So when I said, because I wanted to see if you saw what I saw.
No, I did, but that's why I was also like, but when I was seeing it for the first, and it was a long day, right, being outside the house and then going from library to library, and I come back and I watched this. I was like, I have to be like, I use, I'm on gabapentin for my pain, so I was like, I must be like psychosis, like I don't know what this is, because when she said the whole teaching decolonize, I was like watching, I was listening to, I was like, okay, and then she said like, yeah, the business owner stuff and the capitalism, like indoctrination, that was fascinating. And then this part, like, you're right, because she makes the history of like there's a primitive, because what comes up as a critique that some have said, what she's presenting is not factual completely, because that was maybe not capitalism, but also it's primitive communalism, which is very different. And one of the things Rodney points out, I think in this article somewhere else, the point is not necessarily to, because right now when she's talking about the leap, there's an irony there. She's kind of right. There has been a leap into the modern world in the sense of we are more interconnected in a way, obviously, and a return to something previous is really hard to do because there are also these, international problems that need to be fixed. So with capitalism, one of the things that Marx assumed was that through capitalism, you'll create the industry for the state to finally take dictatorship like now you can produce goods in a way that no one could before. So that's something that Rodney believed in too. The thing I found fascinating was also, like you said, the state part. She said once we dismantle the state, we should experiment, imagination. Like these are very interesting terms, but once again, I think also the Lenin disagreement with anarchists, because maybe this sounds more anarchist, is that maybe there will be a time to dissolve the state. I do hope one day we don't need always these other like institutions necessarily. But one thing I do find frustrating with certain, in academia, I've seen this. In academia, there's actually more space to discuss a certain kind of abolition, a certain kind, because it's very anarchic and very removed from like taking that extra step of like, what do we do about the capitalist class? What do we do about to be honest, the compradors? What do you do about the traders and the cowards? That does not need to come up because it creates tension in the room. What you can say is, in a particular type of abolition, experiment, imagine, new ways of interacting as interpersonal, right? Like new ways of being. Like all these terms when it's like Lenin said, one day we might have a state that's dissolved, but in the interim, that's what divorced him from anarchists, who he kind of liked sometimes. There still needs to be a postal service. There still needs to be. I don't want to be responsible for making my neighbor's medicine. I just don't. And if you have a bunch of small businesses, they're still going to compete about things I need. I'm now diabetic. I don't want small business A to be like, I'm in charge of your medicine. I'm like, okay, cool. Can I please get it for free? Oh, go to small business B. They're not going to be free. And that's a medicine. So that's something that I find particularly alarming when I hear certain terms, because it sounds kind of cool and nice to people who are unlike us and unlike to chat, who can like zero in on particular things. Because imagination sounds nice. If I tell my parents, well, they would be kind of bored about it because they don't listen to me. But if I tell someone else, imagine a future where you're just in charge of your own small business, they'll hear autonomy, they'll hear dignity, and they'll hear finally they can be in charge of themselves. But what they won't hear is, you're in charge of making insulin in your bathtub. Please make it for me. That's the end result of these sort of, like, Rodney is talking about efficiency and dignity. And those are actual things you have to contend with. And that is something that Cuba has been able to do even under an embargo. Why can't we just funnel there and see what they're up to? And that's all. That's my main point, is like there's a weird revisionism. It's like we can just do without, but we haven't even done the thing to be without. Like, you know what I mean? Like, why are we leaping when we don't have state power, like you said?
Yeah, yeah.
I appreciate her coming on the thing and having the conversation. I think that's always great. But I did think some of it, I was hearing the same thing you were thinking, but I was also very much of the mind, like, maybe I'm not hearing the same thing, because that's exactly what Rodney would warn against in some regard.
Perfectly, honestly, what I thought we got a version of last night was when John Hope Bryant went on Brokish with Amber and Erica without knowing what he was getting himself into.
Yes, I saw.
And so that's why at the beginning of their conversation, when it was explained how the discussion came to be, and Dr. Joey says something to the effect, I'm not sure to what extent you on this platform know what capitalism is or talk about it or financial literacy. I was like, oh my goodness, she just, and I'm guilty of it too. Like sometimes we're like, I'm happy to be invited. We just show up and I don't have any clue what platform I'm going to, which is a mistake. And in this case, I thought, there was a little bit of condescension on the guest's part in not assuming that any of this had ever been investigated or taken up seriously before. So I felt like she was expecting to be granted an interview that is, I'm guessing, is most what she's accustomed to, which is
right.
Lay out your argument, not much pushback.
Right.
So when she says things like, at the beginning, I teach courses to quote, help people decolonize their voice and visibility. And then Geechee, or then saying later, we need to tap into pre-colonial culture so that we can, access our ancestral wealth, so that we can, so that we can, as part of our job, develop hope, as she says. And then Geechee is trying to politely push back, like, what is generational wealth? What is, not generational wealth. What does ancestral wealth mean?
Right.
And then the guest is saying, well, offers up a definition of wealth that has nothing to do with the modern economy. And it's like, well, that's all well and good if we want to say we have a bunch of pre-colonial ancestral wealth, but it doesn't to Rodney's point, and
right.
It doesn't translate materially. And then at one point, the guest starts talking about examples in Hawaii where people, she said at one point, to justify her project of revolutionizing business to fund revolutions, she said she had been brought to the table by some activists in Hawaii who are using cultural practices in their educational system that Dr. Joey said I can't talk about publicly.
Okay.
That are meant to combat imperial, but she said, when I sat down with these people and said, what do you need most? They said in response, funding. And my cynicism kicked in immediately. And I'm saying, so this is what I'm seeing, what Rodney is critiquing in negritude.
Right.
Like, what is the value of this wonderful pre-colonial Hawaiian culture that you can't really talk about publicly, that is secretive and is somehow secretive and important in saving this community? But according to you, when you ask them what they need most, they say funding. It's like, well, what good is all of this ancestral wealth if you still have to turn around and ask somebody to set up a bunch of small family-owned businesses or to fund whatever they need? In other words, really what I'm getting to is that we need some other Rodney-esque analytical intervention.
Well,
to close that gap between what is vaguely described as ancestral wealth, and yet the people practicing it are saying we need modern wealth to fund our work. So somewhere in there is where I'm saying we needed that Rodney.
Well, the thing is, like, I know
oh yeah, Sherry, what's up? I'm bad. I didn't even recognize. I didn't even realize that was you. Yeah. What's the secret, and why it gotta be a secret? Why can't I know what the secret? Why can't we know what the secret is? All right. Anyway, yeah, my bad. Go ahead.
Sorry. No. I made this graph. It's a very important graph where it's like this, like basically the 60s.
Hold on.
And it just crossed it out. That's what I feel like that it always feels like. You know what I mean? They're just like, I'm just being honest. That's the thing that gets me with all these conversations. It's not so much where even they land. They always, like you said, they always have this sense of like, I did this first. Like, even with the solidarity aspect, that's not new, nor are the challenges, like between Asians, Africans, Latinos, even some whites, like that's not new. So that's the thing that I also struggle with when people come to me, whether they're asking questions or wanting to debate or discuss. It's always that effort of like, yeah, like you said, I don't know if you've thought about this, but did you ever think? And it's like, dude, like, did you read this? And the other thing about the education part, what did he say? What did she say? Oh, he also critiqued her saying business as we know it, which is very interesting. And then also critiqued her for saying like the personal empowerment part. Like, there's a lot of like Rodney was correct again about this one thing. Even if we don't have the social base in the United States to even train our leaders to talk better about socialism necessarily, there's a little bit of the populism thing that bleeds out. So like Rodney had predicted at his time, the elites in America, they do this. They also need ideological benefactors or people who could kind of portray themselves and create an ideology that sounds new, right? So that's why like the personal is political. Like, for instance, I'm now disabled. It's a new thing for me. Yes, waking up every morning is kind of difficult, and it is part of the step to do revolution. If I'm just in bed, sometimes it's hard, but there's no way I'm ever going to say that is it. Like the personal empowerment part, I need to be part of a collective that's going to win state power. So I feel like that always goes back to, don't think that, like the pre-colonial thing is kind of fascinating because again, that is something I've heard from a lot of smart people. like, again, even family members who say like there's an Indian culture or a Bengali culture, well, they say Indian, and I'm like, dude, you just complained about this other Indian guy like for 50 minutes to me. You know what I mean? Like you're at a party, like an uncle is like kind of sipping, and he's just like, India was great, and we could be that if we just and then you just think to yourself, you just complained about every single Indian guy you met that day. So I don't know what you're seeing or lacking, but at the end of the day, it's again, the 60s are a mystery. The early 70s are a mystery. Thomas Sankara is a mystery to us, not to other people. Because the third world, they still keep that light on. Because even in India, the Communist Party is still a political party, and they will talk to you. Like my father, he's now in America. He's been like American in that way. But he talked to me about Lenin. And I asked him the other day, did you read a lot of Lenin? He's like, yeah, somewhat. But the political culture there was, even if you don't touch Lenin, you know Lenin. So they have that. But here it's like, oh, Malcolm X, he's empowerment, or the King story, which is like the NBA, it's about all these teams and wearing the shirts. That's where we are. And even with the leaders who associate themselves as socialists aligned barely, it's always about like, well, our leaders are bad, but elect me or something. And I believe in government, but there's a bit of that happening. And then again, the 60s and 70s. I mean, Mamdani, I'm glad he said ICE should be abolished. I did not expect it, so I'm glad. But I always go back to his interview where he said really quickly, Venezuela and then Cuba are repressive. That's always I go back to, because the context is what? It was just a few days or a few weeks before Venezuela's leader was kidnapped while sleeping with his wife. And they're still waiting for some bizarre charges to happen. And instead of like looking at Venezuela and seeing how long they survived against this, we instead have to reimagine the world. And that's the same with some Indians too. They like, there's a Hindu mythology. And I'm like, listen, man, like there weren't even like unified kingdoms. Like, I don't understand what you want me to say. Plus, I don't want to live under a kingdom. I just want to have medicine. I just want to make sure my aunties and everyone have medicine. Like, what's wrong with that? So I just drew the stupid graph because to me, that's what it all sounds like. Don't think about what happened. Jared, like Dr. Ball, the USSR lasted at least 75 years, right? Like, I'm not crazy. And then all these other anti-colonial waves were wave after wave punching the gut of Europe. Am I like, why are it's so what's the word? Disgusting and quite rude to just be like, whatever. No one's ever thought of it. Really? So Sankara, who's in his grave, didn't think of it? That's really messed up. Like, to me, that makes me most like, and not about her. I'm talking about other people who do that kind of affect. Like,
no,
John
I mean,
O'Brien
again, this isn't
like, rude.
yeah. None of this is personal. It's about, for me, it's about these narratives. It's she's making the argument almost, obviously not verbatim, but almost step for step, that is being made against or in favor of Black capitalism, or in favor of this idea that Asians figured it out, but Black people can't. It's that same
Taiwan, yeah.
I mean, I was just listening to this, like, and that's why when I played the part that I did get right in that clip, where Geechee is raising a certain context, and her response is, well, that's because you all went through slavery, and the Taiwanese, we didn't go through slavery, and those of us who didn't go through slavery and have our connections to our traditional cultures, we hear the same sometimes, honestly, among continental Africans who want to make some distinction between, but this is why I love what Rodney points out.
Right.
There is nothing authentically African about any of these countries on the continent of Africa. And I do this to intentionally, for instance, in my classrooms, to be provocative, but I do believe it to be true. There's nothing authentic to Nigeria, authentically African to Nigeria. Kenya is not an authentically African construct. Morocco is definitely not and none of them. So this idea that continental Africans in the 21st century are automatically operating on something more authentically pre-colonially cultural than are Africans in the diaspora, I at minimum challenge that, if not fully dismiss that as an argument. So this idea, though, similarly, that anyone outside of the experience of enslavement has some authentic connection to pre-colonial pasts that are themselves positively informing today. I'm like, again, if in your wonderfully pre-colonially culturally practiced untouched Taiwan, 10% got 60%.
Right.
Like, I'm not moved by that. So that's where, again, Rodney is saying, as I'm interpreting him, look, your identity is beautiful and wonderful. It will not solve in and of itself these problems. And until you are, how did he put it? Until we are, oh man, let me do him. Let me because that's why I quoted that part, that throughout the continent, none of the successful independence movements denied the basic validity of the boundaries created a few decades ago by imperialism. And expanding that, and what that means, narratively, is what I think we're running into here. That the terrain upon which all of this is being discussed has not been critiqued properly. So then people can come around and say a version of, we have ancestral wealth.
And even if there's ancestral wealth, how do you get that? You don't get that by competing the big businesses that own it, because they're not going to let go of it. Like Singapore, for example, Crazy Rich Asians. I mean, there's like a lot of Singaporean firms that own the land. I mean, they also have housing for everyone, even though it's like all stuffed in, but they have other policies. And with Taiwan, I only know this because my dad actually he is a Maoist also. He has fond memories of, not memories, he never lived in China, but he likes China. But anyway, he did say to me, like, he hates Chiang Kai-shek. So I know a little bit. So he would always bring, it's like a knee-jerk reaction if I mentioned, I don't know how it happened. He's like, oh, that, coward, that person. So, because they all know, like, and he's, again, I bring this, he's Indian. So there's like an Asian political culture that's Marxist and communist. So he has this adverse reaction. All I know is that also Taiwan's story is rather complicated. I don't know what her background exactly is, if she's originally Taiwanese, but if she's not,
I think she said she was, yeah.
Okay, so if she is, still, that is unfortunately has been conditioned too by the genocide that happened. Not to be so like serious, but there was a genocide of Taiwanese to the point that there's people, I think friends of mine who went said there were apologies made. Like a lot of Taiwanese who are Chinese who came there reckon with it, not perfectly. Plus, America, but the United States also protects Taiwan, so they give money to them, so they don't have to make a defense industry, so they can have their little petty little small businesses. Which like the vendor sector is not exactly what's ruling Taiwan. It's still like a combination of the Progressive Party and the nationalists who fight over, and now they're trying to move away from China. But no, it's not even that. Like that's to me is, and what is pre-colonial? Like again, the society also gives short shrift to the pre-colonial societies that did exist. That's the other thing that's kind of annoying, is that they existed with a version of government in terms of like in India or in Pakistan, the Mohenjo civilization that the British found eventually. It had aqueducts. Like I know we mentioned they had actual aqueducts, like to clean. Like they weren't just like, man, Mr. Singh and you, whatever names they used back then. We got to come together. You can buy and trade. I'll trade you an aqueduct, and you can make an aqueduct. No, they were like, we have a system. We're gonna. So even that conversation gets annoying to me, because it wasn't like these little petty little tribes. They were quite massive, and people have said when the Spanish arrived with their, to be quite honest, with their criminal ass, like coming in as conquistadors. They were like losers, like just draped in their stupid armor, sweating, gross. All the native people finding them in the forest, like, oh, there's some gross ass people coming. They smell like shit, and they were terrible. They would be baffled every other day when they would come to a city that didn't include the level of grossness even in their cities yet. So that's the other thing that annoys me. There is a pre-colonial condition, but it isn't like this localized, decentralized thing either. There was a lot of complexity to these societies nonetheless. And then you also have the modern world that needs to be thought of. I don't want to just, again, rely on a territorial demand of even going smaller. I want to go big. I want climate change to be good. I want everybody on this planet not to wait for their smallest business owner to be like, hey, you deserve a new shirt. Like, I just want everyone to get what they need,
Listen, Sudip, unfortunately, I do have to wrap it up here, but I want to do so by reminding us of something one of my 00 African homeboys likes to point out whenever people want to romanticize or bring up the pre-colonial past, which is that they always do so absenting the warrior traditions. So, like, if we're gonna bring up the pre-colonial past, let's not just talk about the ways that they can support us in developing, some business or some exchange. Let's talk about, some of them wanted to smack a colonizer that showed up without permission. Like, let's tap back into that a little bit. So, like he's always talking about, people always talk about Ma'at and the balancing nature of Kemetic tradition, and he's like Ma'at had a warrior tradition too,
right?
Like
right.
So I want to raise up some of that as well. Sudip, thank you very much again. We will obviously we'll continue with these going forward, and we'll let folks know when we schedule the next one. Big thanks to of course, a heroic salute to Walter Rodney.
Yes.
A big salute to our undefeated chat. And the link to, and a big salute to Dare to Struggle, Dare to Win, Cherie and Geechee. The link to that discussion is in the show description now, as is a link to the Rodney article. Any last comments before we?
The only thing is just, read Rodney. Don't be ashamed of being a Marxist necessarily, and just read the people who are there. Don't have to think you have to reinvent anything. I think that's important, and also solidarity to the Palestinian people who are also dealing with a horrible situation in terms of that peace group that's being formed and being signed on to. So glory to the resistance there as well, and how they're going to try to fight back against what's going to be more hardship for them.
Yeah, good point, no doubt. Thank you for that. Again, thanks everybody for joining us. Please do all the things to support the platform. And I can't imagine that this is applying to anyone watching this, but to the extent you're not supporting Black Liberation Media as well, please do that. And as always, peace, only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. And we'll catch you next time around here with more.
And what did you sacrifice?
Calm. Kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, that set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy and defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything, 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 everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.